Sky long serpent, for the spirit, for my mother and father, Andrea and Leroy Taegar, I love you. My mother's hand of fire, my father's hand of fire, sailing the cosmos of my imagination, healing me with the divine fire of God's love, light. The sky sleeps my skull, all the masks are ash. The sea of skulls singing lungs, these lungs of sky, this skull of infinity foaming lungs of sky, this history of sky foaming lungs, these bones of lungs singing the universe. The sky of nectar foaming my lungs, the venom is ash, the sky vibrating in my lungs, these children of sky foaming sound, this flower of infinity foaming my skull. The root of sun singing my skull, this fetus of fire foaming my skull, thunder in the throat drumming the bones, brother of sky, the bullets are ash, this breast of lungs foaming sky, this womb of lungs foaming sky. Our spirit is housed in mommy's sunlight, our souls are housed in daddy's sky, the sound travels my bones, the city of sound foaming my brain, this sound travels my bones, this city of sound foaming my brain, the bones fade to ash, the city sleeps with lights in my lungs, this sun foaming my skull to sound, my eyes sing the sun, the city vibrates my lungs, the shadows are ash, the echoes are ash, the night, the abyss singing my spine to sleep, the thorns are ash, the sky of lungs foaming my skull, these breasts of sun foaming my sky, this kaleidoscope of lungs foaming my skull, this shadow of skull foaming abyss, my brain blossoming foam, my skull blossoming shadow, this shadow of skulls foaming sea, this heart of healing lungs, this wind in my skull foaming shadows, this abyss of ash foaming skull, these flowers of foam sunning my skull with sky, this whisper of wind foaming my skull, this echo in my lungs foaming to ash, this fruit of the womb foaming sky, the womb of my skull foaming sound, this window of my womb foaming sound, this skull of sound foaming sky, the landscape of my lungs foaming sun, the landscape of my lungs foaming sound, these flowers blossoming my skull, the lungs of shadows foaming sound, this journey of lungs foaming my skull, the universe of sky foaming my lungs, fire in the lungs, the silence of my heart foaming sound, this beauty of blossoms foaming my heart to sound, the sound of clouds foaming, my skull sleeping in God's light, the sky of clouds foaming my skull with sound of sky, the visitor of the wind foaming my ears with sky, the spirit visitor foaming my bones with sky, my skull foaming sun, my skull singing wind, the abyss of infinity, the infinity of the abyss, this abyss of lungs, this window of whispers foaming sound, singing the wind, this orbit of lungs foaming universe, this balance of lungs foaming sea, these clouds of lungs foaming the wind, the skull storm foaming wings, these feathers of pearls foaming sky, the lion tiger foaming my lungs with lightning, this dove of clouds foaming my ears with pearls, this silence of lungs floating my skull, this heart of sun foaming sky, the veins vanishing, the veils vanishing, the sky floating my lungs, this sky floating my lungs, floating to see my ankles of salt, the sky floating the sun, this kaleidoscope of lungs foaming sun, the sky of lungs foaming my sky, Christopher Okigbo's heart of sun foaming, the cosmos of water of astral wombs, the sky floating my sky, these pearls of foam flaming the sky, this womb of sun foaming my brain with sky, this skull of sun foaming infinity, these roses foaming my skull with sun, the sky blossoming foam, these roses of blood forming my lungs, this sky of lungs forming my skull, the sky forming skulls, the sky forming sun, the night abyss forming my lungs, the sky forming sound, the lightning forming sound, the singing lightning to breeze, the breeze of blood forming lungs, these lungs forming sky, these lungs rooted to history, these lungs forming sound, the light of lungs forming sky, the sky forming my lungs with sky, the sky forming my lungs with roses, these waves of foam singing my skull, the sky forming my lungs to harmony, the sky floating sky, the thunder forming my lungs singing to sky, the shadows forming in my skull, the storm healer forming my lungs to sky, the black arrow of the lizard darting to tree, darting to root, this wind forming my lungs, the wind singing lungs to sky, the sky forming stars, this window of lungs forming skulls to sleep, the sky of lungs forming sea, the sky sings my throat to sea, the sky sings my throat to sun, the sky swimming my lungs, the sky forming my skull with sound, this flight of words forming my skull, these lungs breathing sky, this belly of sun singing my lungs, this map of skulls forming a key to spirit, the spirit to spirit, infinity, this wind healer of lungs forming my sky, this wind healer of lungs forming the wind, this face of fire forming wind, these breasts of sun forming my skull, the silence of my skull singing sky, this rose of fire forming my skull, the mother mouth forming sound, the father lung forming sky, the voice visits silence and blossoms the dream, this voice of silence forming the sky, this mother sound forming mother air, this sky of wind forming my skull, this flame singing my skull to wind, this heart of wind forming my skull, this light in my lungs singing sun, this shadow in my lungs singing sky, this window of lungs forming sky, this flame of skull flaming wrists, this rose of flame drinking my skull, this wind of air forming the wind with sea, this whisper of windows singing my lungs, this sky of lungs, this window of lungs, this heart of flame burning salt singing sea, this heart of sky forming windows, this lung of windows forming suns, this skull of lungs, this breast of lungs forming sea, this throat of voices scanning sky, this tongue of voices singing sea. His tongue of lungs forming sky, the whisper of lungs forming sun, the spine of suns lighting the skull, this infinite lung forming sun, this air of sun sings my lungs to dream, this shadow of lungs forming sky, this skull of wings forming my lungs with sound, this mother of winds singing my lungs to ski, to see, this voice visiting the lungs, this sky vanishing my lungs, this universe of lungs forming my skull to see, this sky of infinity blossoming my lungs, blossoming my skull to see, infinity sleeping in my lungs, the spirit of air forming my lungs, the sky of sound forming my lungs, this skull of lungs forming my sea, the sky of sun forming my lungs, the sky of lungs forming sound, this window of lungs forming light, this window of wind forming lungs, the roses of muscle blossom to a bouquet of stones, this bouquet of roses blossoms to muscles, this sky forming sound to lungs, these petals of lungs perfuming the wind with foam, perfuming my skull with sky, the sky of feathers floating my spine, the sky of flowers forming my lungs, the sky of lungs forming my window with sky, the sky of lungs singing lungs, this heart of universe forming my lungs to eggs of infinity, this window of lungs forming sound, these petals pregnant with light, the sky of lungs singing, this window of lungs forming sky, the sky forming sound, the spirit of sky forming my lungs with sound, the sky of lungs forming sound, this foam developing sound, blossoming sky in the lungs, this womb of lungs forming sound, the sky womb forming sound, these lungs floating sky, these lungs levitating dream, my lungs listening to sky, the sky of lungs forming sound, the air of infinity forming my lungs, this air of infinity forming my lungs, these bones of sun protecting sky, the sky forming sound, this island of lungs forming sound, the sky of wind forming my lungs, the sky singing lungs to sea, infinity blossoming in my lungs, the sky of sound forming my lungs, the sky of lungs singing wind, the sky singing wind, a voice of lungs forming sky, a voice of lungs forming the wind, this window of lungs forming sound, this sky singing lungs, this window of lungs breathing whispers, these lungs of infinity singing the universe, this rose of blood forming my skull, the sky singing the wind, the sky of lungs forming the wind, the lion larynx forming sun, this belly of sun blossoming, skulls spinning in storms, the window of lungs forming sound, this window of wind forming the lungs with stars, this bone of lungs blossoming sound, the buoy of lungs forming sound, this visitor of veins forming, the sea in my ears, sleeping in storms, my skull sings, sailing sea, this window of lungs singing the wind, this shadow in my lungs singing my skull to sea, this sky singing sea, this shadow of lungs forming the sky, this lightning in the lungs forming sky, howling lightning, this howling moon of yellow fathers fathering the air, this wind singing my lungs to sea, these lungs forming sky from the roots, the sky forming lungs, this window of lungs forming sky, this window of lungs forming sky, the sun in my skull singing my lungs, this full flower of my lungs, this sun in my skull blossoming sky, the sky of wind forming my lungs, the sky forming lungs, the sky visiting my lungs, the sky of sun forming the skull, the sky of sun singing my lungs, the sky of lungs singing the wind, this window of lungs singing the wind of lungs singing sea, the sky of lungs singing the wind, 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 the sky of wind singing my lungs to sea, these lungs sprouting sun, the infinity lungs sprouting sun, the sky navigating my nerves, these waves in my lungs forming sea, this whisper of lungs forming sky, the skull of lungs forming wind, the sky of whispers forming my lungs, the sky of whispers forming my lungs, the visitors of the voices visiting light, this labyrinth of lungs singing light, these lungs navigating the universe, this window of lungs singing the wind, sky orbiting my skull, the abyss of shadow, the sky of lungs forming my skull with song, the sky forming sound, the sky singing sea, the sky forming sound, the wind singing my lungs with sky, the sky of sun singing skulls, this tongue of sun forming my skull, this zero of infinity forming my skull, the sky singing songs to sun, the skull of sun singing sky, these lungs of light forming sky, the sky singing my lungs to sea, the sky singing wind, the sky of wind forming my skull to sea, the sky of whispers forming my skull, the womb of sky fire wind forming sound, the sky singing in my lungs, the sky of lungs forming sun, this womb of wind forming sky, this blossom of lungs forming sky, the sky of lungs singing wind, the sky of lungs singing wind, the sky of lungs whispering wind, the sky of lungs singing the wind, the sky singing lungs, the sky of wind forming lungs to blossom sky, the sky singing lungs, the sky of lungs forming sky, the sky of lungs singing windows to sea, this womb of wind forming sky, these flowers blossoming my lungs, the flower of my skull blossoming bone, this map of sky mapping my lungs to sky, this heart of lungs forming sound, this heart of light forming sound, this map of lungs forming sky, the sky singing wind, this map of lungs floating to sky, the kaleidoscope of lungs singing wind, this island of lungs singing sea, this skull of silence singing, my soul of songs to my sky of light, this orbit of lungs forming sound, this shadow of lungs, this shadow of silence sleeping my skull, this seed of lungs forming the wind, this sky of lungs forming the wind, this wave of lungs forming sky, the sky singing lungs. The sky of lungs forming sound, the sky forming sound, this breast of sun forming sky, this womb of lungs floating sky, this sky of lungs blossoming sound, this heart of lungs forming sky, this heart of infinity singing, the wind, this silence of skulls sleeping in shadows, this skull of silence sleeping in sea, the shadow of my skull sleeping in sky, the veins vanishing to vein, the womb of sky singing, the wind, the womb of whispers orbiting the air of the air, the island of lungs launching infinity, this silence in my skull singing the wind, this throat of sun foaming universe, this window of whispers singing the womb, arteries aviating the airports of amnesia, this labyrinth of lungs launching to sky, this fire in the lungs singing the wind, the shadow streams, the lungs orbit silence, these lungs swimming the universe, this sky of lungs, this warrior lungs foaming, lions of lightning, this key mapping infinity in my lungs, this warrior lungs singing, lightning to the skull, this trachea of sun foaming, infinity of diamonds of God, divine fire, this flower of flames, foaming my skull, this heart of wind singing my lungs, the silence in my skull singing the shadows, the warrior lungs singing sun, the lungs navigating space, the mother of lungs singing the wind, this voice singing from lungs, from trachea, from sun, orbiting, this voice vanishing the veils, this wind of song fathering the lungs, the sky singing my lungs, the sky sleeping in my skull, this hibiscus of sun singing my lungs, these lungs of sky foaming the universe, this sky blossoming lungs, the sky singing in my lungs, these skulls orbiting sky, these lungs singing sky, this island of lungs forming the sky with sun, this ink of darkness forming my sky, my abyss, this silence of lungs forming the sky with wind, this heart of sun singing, this satellite of skulls singing the wind, this bouquet of sun flowering my skull, this voice of sun orbiting the lungs, this sea of lungs forming sky, singing to skulls, this sun of lungs forming skulls with sky, the sky, this shadow of lungs singing my skull, this infinity of lungs singing sky, the fire in my lungs sending my hands to sleep, this heart of spirit foaming my skull with sea, these stars of lungs singing the sea, this bouquet of suns forming my skull with sound, forming skulls with sky, this fruit forming my skull with sound, this gravity of lungs orbiting sky, this root of gravity singing my lungs, this flame in my lungs singing rainbows, this breast of lungs singing the wind, this breath of sky, this wind of lungs, this nostril of lungs singing the wind, this silence of lungs singing sky, these feathers of pearls forming sky, this sky of lungs forming, my sky of songs of astral milk, of imagination sail, this fruit of lungs perfuming the universe with sky, this mouth of sun bouqueting my bones with sky and beauty in the forever fire of God's future, this sky singing my lungs to sea, this sky singing my lungs to sky, this gravity of lungs forming infinity, this voice of lungs blossoming sky, this bouquet of voices singing my skull, this heart of wind forming the lungs, this sky of blooms blossoming my brain, this skull of sun singing the wind, this drum of bones vibrating my heart with sound, this map of infinity soaking my skull with sky, this sky singing my lungs, this larynx of lungs, lightning sound, this heart of infinity foaming the lungs with sound, this sky of drums vibrating the heart, this drum of bones singing the wind, this heart of infinity blossoming my lungs with sound, this sky of lungs swimming my skull, this skull of rivers foaming the sea, this sky of sound drumming the bones, this blood singing my lungs, this womb of infinity foaming the sky with sound, with the thunder of larynx, this winder of lungs, thundering the sky with blossoms of wind, this blood of lungs forming rivers, snakes stinging the sky, singing the skull, this seed of lungs radiating the roots with sound, the blood of the lungs forming the rivers, these rivers in the roots radiating sky, this larynx of lungs forming the wind, this storm of lungs singing the wind, this heart of drums forming the sky with sound, this voice of wind singing to the lungs, this earth pregnant with lungs, pregnant with roots radiating the rivers, this door of wings forming the sky, these lips of infinity forming the sky, this whisper of lungs singing the wind, this window of lungs, this satellite of skulls orbiting, this harmonizer of skulls, flooding my lungs with sky, this tongue of flame forming my skull with sound, with sun, this map of lungs forming the sky, blossoming the wind, orbiting the fruits of my skull, this drum of lungs singing the universe, this drum of lungs vibrating the heart, this heart of lungs singing the wind to sky, the noise in my skull singing the wind, this heart of drums forming the skull with sound, spirit mother singing my bones to sleep, these harmonizing lungs singing the wind, whispering the skull to sleep, whispering the bones to sleep. This fire in the lungs singing the wind, this skeleton of song singing the wind, this sky of wind singing the lungs, the sea of singing tongues of light, ancestors of the abyss guiding the future fire to dream, this sky of lungs singing the flames from my heart of sky, a sky of lungs orbiting the universe, singing stars to the bones in earth, ashes in wind and sea, the serpents are biting their tails, this sky of fire foaming my heart, this river of lungs forming my skull, this breast of lungs singing the wind, light singing my skull, this sky singing my lungs, this heart of lungs singing the spine to sleep, this fire in my lungs singing sea, this sky of infinity forming my bones with sun, this heart of lungs singing the wind, dazzled by the diamonds and the daggers, this labyrinth of lungs singing sky, this map of lungs singing the heart of sun, this hurricane of lungs singing the storm, this sky of lungs singing my skull to sleep, this sky of sea singing skulls, this sky of lungs singing skulls to sea, the sky singing my lungs to sleep, this sky of bones singing my sun, this sky singing sun, the veils vanishing in the veins, the sound in my bones forming sky, this sky singing my skull to sea, this seed of lungs singing the wind, this sky seeding my skull with wind, this sky singing my lungs, this sky singing my lungs with sea, this sky singing my lungs with sea, this sky swimming my lungs with sea, this sky swimming my lungs to sea, this sky swimming my lungs to sea, the sky of lungs singing the wind, this sky singing lungs, this symphony of universe forming my skull with sky, this symphony of universe forming my ears with sky, this sky singing my lungs to sea, this bouquet of lungs blossoming the wind, the thunder in the lungs singing sun, the larynx of lungs singing thunder to the roots, this heart of lungs singing the wind, this lung of clouds singing the wind to thunder, the sky singing the wind, these flowers of flame singing, the sky to lungs, the sky singing my lungs, this sky singing lungs, the sky navigating these lungs, this breast of lungs singing the wind, this womb of lungs forming the sky, these feet, the roots of infinity, This thunder in the lungs forming my skull. This thunder in the lungs singing the wind. This thunder in the lungs singing sky. This sky singing my lungs to thunder. This lung of infinity forming sky. This breast of sun forming the milk of dreams. This orbit of lungs dancing the wind. This fruit of doves nourished in my brain of beauty. This bouquet of songs orbiting the wind. The sky sailing my lungs. The flower of stars forming my lungs with celestial nectar. These islands of lungs singing the wind. This breast of lungs singing the wind. This breast of lungs singing the wind. This sea of lungs singing my skull to sleep. This sky of my lungs singing the wind. This voice of wind singing my lungs to sleep. This pearl of sun singing my skull. Singing, singing, singing. This heart of flame lighting this beauty of sky, this window of lungs singing sky, whispering to the womb, these veins of lungs singing the window of lungs singing the sea, singing the wind, these rivers of veins singing to sea, this bouquet of birds floating the sky to sun, this silence singing my lungs, this river of songs forming my skull, this skull of sun singing rivers, this throat of sun forming infinity, this sky of rivers forming my lungs, this sky of rivers forming my blood, this sky of rivers floating my skull, forming, the sky of infinity singing my lungs, this thunder of lungs singing my soul, this thunder singing my skull, this window of lungs forming my skull with the thunder of dreams, this thunder in the lungs singing the sky, this skull of flowers singing the wind, this skull of flowers forming the sky, this skull of thunder drinking my bones, this lung of thunder dreaming my skull, this skull of lungs forming the clouds, this skull of lungs forming my skull, this sky of lungs singing the wind, this sky burning with patience, this sky burning with the fire, with the spirit of sun singing to the skull, this womb of lungs forming the universe, this sky of lungs thundering the bones, this womb of light forming the lungs, this womb of lungs forming sun, these tongues of flame forming the womb with sky, these lungs sailing my womb of sky, this womb of whispers forming to cloud, floating to cloud, these whispering clouds forming my lungs with sky, this drum of lungs singing the wind, singing the heart to sky, this bosom of lungs forming the womb, this window of lungs singing the sky, this university of the spirit forming my lungs with sky, this blossom of wind blossoming in the lungs, blossoming the womb with sky, this womb of sky singing, sailing the skull, this petal of lungs singing the wind, this tongue of lungs forming reality, this belly of dreams singing, the roots the sky, this throat of thunder singing the wind, this voice of feathers floating sky, this voice of thunder forming the wind with lungs, this shadow in the lungs blossoming darkness, blossoming the abyss, this death drum soaking my lungs with sky, the seeds of infinity sprouting suns in my skull, this drum of lungs vibrating my heart with sound, this heart of spirit singing songs of infinity from this heart of drums, this heart of bone, this heart of wind, the fire in my lungs singing the spirit, this skeleton of sun navigating these islands of lungs, this journey of death dancing my lungs to dream, the light of wind forming my skull to see, this sky of suns forming skulls, this breast of lungs forming sky, this sky forming lungs with sound, this sky of lungs forming sea, this window of lungs forming sky, this spirit of sky singing my lungs, the roses blossoming in my heart of sky, this umbilical universe forming sound from the lungs, this universe of lungs forming sky, this infinity of sky forming sea, this heart of sun forming infinity, this sky of sun orbiting lungs, these lungs forming sky to sea, these lungs singing sky, whispering wombs to spirit, whispering wombs to sky spirit, whispering wombs to sky, orbiting, the sky of lungs forming sea, the sky of lungs orbiting sun, this heart of infinity singing universe, this mouth of spirit forming clouds, this heart of lungs forming universe, this skull of sun singing universe, this blossom of bones forming sky, this universe of lungs forming sky, this ova of lungs singing lungs, this blossom of lungs streaming universe, this shadow of lungs sleeping in sky, the heart of lungs forming universe, forming sky, the skull of sea forming sky, the skull of silence singing the shadows, the skull of silence singing the shadows to sleep, this silence of skulls singing sea, this sky singing skulls to sleep, this womb of sky forming lungs, this throat of sky forming suns, this window of lungs forming sky, sky, this labyrinth of lungs singing air, this heart of lungs, this bouquet of lungs singing the wind, this flower of sun forming my skull, this nest of nerves singing light, this thunder of words forming my skull with sound, this map of lungs singing eternity, this abyss of lungs forming sky, these seas of lungs forming sky with wind, this bouquet of lungs forming wind to sky, this womb of lungs whispering the wind with sound, this breast of sun singing my milk to sea, this lung of space singing the shadows of keys, this sun of infinity sprouting my lungs with sea, this wave of lungs singing the sun, this abyss of lungs singing the shadows, this abyss of shadows singing the lungs, this heart of sky singing the wind, this heart of silence, infinity singing, this womb of silence singing the wind, this wind of the water singing my lungs to sky, this sky of lungs singing the wind, the fire in my lungs forming skulls, this map of lungs singing the infinity of the skull, this window of sky, this window of lungs, this wind of lungs mapping infinity, the island of lungs singing the wind, this womb of wind singing the lungs, this bud of lungs blossoming sky, this voice of skulls singing the wind, this wind of lungs forming the sea, this memory of sun forming my skull with sound, this throat of sound thundering the sun in my ears, these lungs pregnant with wind, pregnant with sun, pregnant with the blossom of the wind, the vultures vanishing in the veins vanishing in the veins, rivers of infinity, the sky of songs, blossoming wind, this bouquet of lungs singing the wind, this sky of lungs singing the wind, this labyrinth of lungs blossoming sound, this whisper of thunder forming my lungs, vibrating the drum of my bones, vibrating this map of lungs blossoming, the wind, this womb of lungs singing, the thunder, this birth of lungs singing fire, lungs launching infinity, launching pearls of reason, this window of fire singing my lungs to see, this spine of ink singing the abyss, this window of lungs listening to sky, this gravity of lungs singing the earth, this body of sky singing the wind, this silence of bone drumming my skull, my father's river of lungs nourishing the roots of my dreams, my mother's hands of sky healing my skull to sound, this imperfect earth entering the wind, this wind singing the universe, this voice of lungs forming my skull, this rose of muscle blossoming bones, the drum of the bones vibrating lungs, these flowers of fire blossoming my lungs, these lungs blossoming to sky, this map of sky singing my skull, this skull of fire blossoming the wind, this sky of lungs blossoming my throat with sound, the wind whispers to my bones are ash, this fire in the lungs, blossoming sky, the fire in my hands, my mother's hands of fire, my father's hands of fire, healing my psyche with God's divine fire of love, with the breath of beauty, singing the blossom of sky, singing the blossom of lungs, singing the blossom of universe.